Hisayama, Japan, is a small fishing town where doctors have retested the same residents' brains for over 60 years, and one finding stopped a room full of researchers cold. People whose memory stayed sharpest into their 80s and 90s share a strong sense of purpose, what the Japanese call ikigai, and were 36% less likely to develop dementia within just 3 years. No supplement, no brain training game, just a reason to get up. But that's one piece of a bigger pattern, and the piece that matters most might not be the one you guess. Japan has the oldest population on Earth. Nearly 30% of the country is over 65, the highest share of any nation in recorded history. If cognitive decline were simply the price of aging, you'd expect Japan to be buried in it. Instead, researchers from Tohoku University started asking a strange question back in 2003. Not what pills these elderly villagers were taking, because most of them weren't taking any. They asked what these people were doing with their days and what they were putting on their plates, and whether the answer to slowing memory loss had been sitting in plain sight the entire time, ignored because it didn't come in a bottle. They started in a town called Hisayama, just outside Fukuoka. Since 1961, nearly every resident over 40 has been examined on a rolling basis. And since 1985, researchers have been screening specifically for dementia. It's one of the longest running health studies on Earth. And because participation runs above 90%, it captures something almost no other study can. Not a curated sample of health nuts. An entire town. What they found first was about food. Researchers pulled apart the diets of over 1,000 residents and mapped which patterns predicted who developed dementia over the next 15 years. One pattern stood out: high intake of soybeans and soy products, vegetables, seaweed, and dairy, paired with comparatively less white rice. People eating this way had a meaningfully lower rate of developing dementia than people who didn't, and the effect held even after adjusting for other health factors, not a supplement stack. Tofu, natto, miso soup, and the seaweed sitting in your grocery store's Asian aisle that plenty of shoppers walk straight past without a second look. Natto deserves its own moment here, because it's the one food outsiders usually can't get past. Fermented soybeans, sticky, pungent, and acquired taste even for plenty of Japanese kids the first time they try it, dragging strings of it off the chopsticks while a grandparent laughs. But a recent study out of Japan followed over 600 adults past 65 and found that the ones eating natto 2 to 3 times a week had a meaningfully lower rate of mild cognitive impairment than the ones who rarely touched it. The researchers adjusted for age, education, other soy foods, even whether people lived alone, and the association held. Nobody's claiming a spoonful of fermented soybeans rewires the hippocampus. What the data does say is that a food most Western grocery stores barely stock keeps showing up decade after decade in the populations aging the best, sitting quietly next to the miso soup and the pickled vegetables, while multivitamin aisles get built around it in every other country. So the diet is real. But here's where the story gets more interesting, because the Hisayama researchers didn't stop at food, and neither should you. At the same time doctors were tracking what people ate, other researchers across Japan were tracking something harder to measure: purpose. The Surugaya project followed 830 Japanese adults over 70 and simply asked them one thing: did they feel a sense of ikigai, a reason for being? The people who said yes weren't just happier. Over the following years, they were 31% less likely to develop functional disability. And separately, other researchers found the Ikigai group was 36% less likely to develop dementia within 3 years. A different long-term study out of Sendai found something even starker. Elderly adults who reported no sense of Ikigai had a 50% higher risk of dying from any cause at all, driven heavily by cardiovascular disease. It's easy to hear purpose and assume researchers threw it in as a soft, feel-good variable to round out the data. They didn't. In these studies, not having a reason to get up in the morning tracked with mortality risk on the level of a real, measurable medical condition, cardiovascular disease specifically, a heart, quite literally, giving up faster in someone who felt no one needed them that day. And Ikigai in Japan rarely means something abstract or grand. For a retired fisherman, it might be tending a garden plot every morning before the heat sets in. For a grandmother, it might be walking 2 blocks to mind her neighbor's kids after school lets out. A shopkeeper who could have retired a decade ago but still opens the same shutter at 7 a.m. because 3 regulars would notice if he didn't. Small, repeated, socially anchored. Nobody in these towns is chasing a grand philosophical mission statement. They're just needed by somebody on a specific day at a specific hour. That social piece turns out to matter on its own, separate from purpose entirely. In Tottori Prefecture, a town called Huki runs community classes for older residents showing early signs of cognitive decline. The classes combine light exercise, cognitive drills, and something the researchers running the program flagged as just as important as either one: contact. 10 to 20 people meeting in person, week after week. When the pandemic forced these classes online or shut them down entirely, researchers tracking the same participants recorded measurable drops in cognitive scores within months. Take away the room full of other people, and the benefit of the exercises alone wasn't enough to hold the line. This is the part almost nobody puts in the headline because isolation doesn't sell a supplement or an app. But across the dementia research coming out of Japan, social contact shows up again and again as a variable that predicts decline almost as reliably as diet does. Loneliness isn't just sad. In older adult, it functions like an actual risk factor, sitting next to blood pressure and cholesterol on the same chart. There's a 4th piece, and it's the most boring one on paper, which is probably why it gets skipped in every Japanese secret headline that goes viral. Walking, not a gym membership, not a fitness tracker buzzing at 10,000 steps. In towns built long before cars became the default, the grocery store, the shrine, the neighbor's house, and the bus stop are all still close enough to reach on foot. So walking happens as a byproduct of running errands, never as a separate task penciled into the calendar. Researchers studying cardiovascular and cognitive health in older Japanese adults keep circling back to blood flow as one of the clearest mechanical links between the body and the brain. Poor circulation starves neurons, the same way it starves a heart muscle, and a habit as unremarkable as a 15-minute walk to buy vegetables shows up, study after study, as one of the few interventions that reliably improves both. You'll also see this same rhythm playing out publicly in parks and courtyards most mornings before most Americans have finished their first cup of coffee. Radio Taiso, a set of simple stretching and calisthenic broadcasts on national radio since the 1920s, still draws a group of older residents into local parks at sunrise, moving through the same routine in unison. It isn't intense. That's sort of the point. It's low impact, it's done outdoors, and critically, it's done next to other people, which folds the exercise piece and the social piece into a single 5-minute habit before breakfast. Ask a long-time participant why they still show up at 6 a.m. and you'll rarely hear from my brain. You'll hear something closer to because everyone else is there too. So picture what's actually happening in a town like Hisayama day to day. Someone in their late 70s wakes up with something specific to do, a garden, a grandchild, a shop to open. They walk there, past the same fish market and the same rice paddies they've walked past for decades, the air smelling like salt and diesel from the boats coming in. They eat a bowl of miso soup with tofu and maybe a portion of natto, because that's just what breakfast has looked like in that house for 60 years. And at some point in the week, they sit across a low table from other people they've known since childhood, sometimes playing shogi or go, sometimes just talking over tea in a culture that still keep its elderly woven into daily community life instead of routed off to the margins. Would that same day even be possible where you live? For a lot of people reading this, the honest answer is no, not without rebuilding some of it on purpose. There's no fish market in walking distance. The neighbor's name is a mystery, and the reason to get up competes every morning with a phone that can fill the exact same hours without anyone ever leaving the couch. None of those 4 things, the food, the purpose, the walking, the company, is doing the heavy lifting alone. And that's actually the biggest finding hiding underneath all of this research, the one that got buried every time a headline picked just one habit to sell. A team studying older Japanese adults compared people doing cognitively engaging activities like puzzles and games against people eating a diet rich in omega-3 fatty acids from fish. Each group alone showed some protective effect, but the group doing both, the mental engagement and the right diet together, showed a stronger association with preserved cognitive function than either factor by itself. A separate multi-country trial out of Finland, following that same logic on a much larger scale, ran a 2-year program combining diet changes, exercise, cognitive training, and tighter management of blood pressure and cholesterol. The combined group beat every group doing just one piece in isolation. Different country, different researchers. Same shape of result over and over whenever anyone actually tests the habits together instead of one at a time. That's the actual mechanism behind the Japan doesn't get dementia the way we do headlines you've probably seen. It was never one secret food or one hidden ritual, it's density. A 78-year-old in a town like Hisayama might hit 5 or 6 of these protective factors before lunch without ever once thinking of it as a health routine, because in that town, it isn't a routine. It's just what a normal week has always looked like, which raises the uncomfortable question underneath all of this. Most of what's protecting these brains isn't available for purchase. You can't order a sense of purpose off a website. You can't bottle a neighbor who still expects you at the table every Sunday. The retirement model a lot of Western countries built, move away from your kids, sell the house, relocate somewhere warm and quiet, optimize for comfort in ways that may have quietly removed some of the exact ingredients that were protecting people's minds the longest. This is also where a lot of people start to disagree with each other, and it's worth sitting in that disagreement for a second instead of rushing past it. Some researchers caution that genetic and a uniquely well-documented population make Japan easier to study than it is to copy, and that the numbers might not translate cleanly to a different country's genetics or healthcare system. That's a fair objection, and nobody in this field claims to have it fully settled. What researchers do broadly agree on, across the studies cited here, is that these 4 factors keep showing up together again and again in the populations that age the best. None of this means memory loss is fully preventable, or that genetics and luck don't matter, because they clearly do. Some of the people in these studies did everything right and still decline. But the pattern researchers keep finding across a fishing town in Fukuoka, a mountain village in Shikoku, and a prevention class in Tottori points the same direction. The brain seems to hold up longest in people who are still needed by someone, still walking somewhere, still eating food their grandmother would recognize, and still showing up to sit across a table from another human being. So, was it worth it? All those small, unglamorous habits a lot of us have quietly let slide in the name of convenience? The walk instead of the car, the neighbor instead of the notification, a reason to get out of bed that has nothing to do with a to-do list. The research out of Japan suggests those habits were never small at all. They were doing the job we've spent billions trying to replace with a pill. If there's one habit from this list you've let go of, the walking, the community, the actual reason to get up in the morning, that's worth sitting with for a minute before you scroll to the next video.